the previous session presenting the special issues on QSS. As I mentioned before, we have the tribute to Professor Loet Leydesdorff, who has been a teacher, a mentor, and a friend of many of us. And this session will be chaired by Sally Wyatt, who's been a long time colleague of Loet's. So, Sally, up to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ishmael, and to everyone at SaveATS for organizing this event. My name is Sally Wyatt. I'm Professor of Digital Cultures at Maastricht University, and it's a great pleasure to chair this particular session, and it's also an enormous pleasure to see a random number of faces and a list of names of colleagues from around the world. That's also very nice in these strange times. As Ishmael has already said, I've known Loet for a very, very long time. I'm not going to give a repeat of the little speech I gave at his official retirement due from the University of Amsterdam a number of years ago, but we were colleagues at the University of Amsterdam, and we were the only people doing communication studies who were doing science and technology studies. And even though, I mean, obviously you're all familiar with Loet's work, a few of you might be familiar with mine, we're kind of different. But nonetheless, for all of our colleagues in communication studies, we were identical. We did STS, that kind of weird thing, and so that was a kind of bonding experience, and Loet's office was just a couple of doors down from mine, and it was good to have somebody to talk to in that department who did kind of understand what I was doing. And I'm also a former director of VTMC, the Netherlands Graduate School for Science, Technology and Modern Culture, which some of you will also be familiar with. And as a former director, I have to say I was always incredibly grateful to Loet as a very loyal and open-minded member of VTMC. And he would always come to our annual meetings and sit through all sorts of things that I'm sure he must have thought were sometimes very strange, but he was always there, always had a question, always trying to make connections. And I think that's one of the things that all of us here now kind of appreciate about Loet, is that kind of open-mindedness and bridge building and making connections that we heard about in the earlier session. He also is, by world standards at the moment, practically a neighbor. He's one of the few people I have actually seen live and in 3 dimensions in the last few months. We've met once or twice after lockdown was lifted in Amsterdam, so that's also been very kind of, in these days, a real pleasure to see Loet and talk with him. Before I hand over to the first speaker, I also just wanted to say one thing about the previous session. I know not all of you were present, but I liked James Evans, one of his slides. He had a nice sort of data mining or text mining activity of looking at the verbs that different people use. And he was looking at the verbs that qualitative and quantitative science studies people were using. But those aren't the only differences, because one of the words he mentioned on the qualitative side was explore. And as some of you know, there's a philosopher of science upstairs in my house at the moment, and I live with a philosopher of science, and he's always complaining about the ways in which STS people just explore things. He says, you know, couldn't you just kind of come to a conclusion or make a claim or do something? So it was kind of interesting to see that empirically confirmed. I will tell him about it later. But I think, you know, we can all agree that Loet does a lot of exploring in different kinds of fields. And we heard earlier about, you know, the kind of qualitative and quantitative, his contributions to the Triple Helix, and going even further back, but I wouldn't want to forget this, I think, very important work he did a very long time ago around science shops and as ways of kind of engaging with people in different sorts of ways, which also came up in the earlier discussion. But I could probably fill a whole hour about Loet, but that's not what I was asked to do. I'd like to first give the floor to Cassidy Sugimoto, who's Professor of Informatics at the School of Informatics, Computing and Engineering at some university, Indiana University, Bloomington, sorry, and president of the International Society for Scientometrics and Informametrics, which is also a society that Loet is very active in. And here we have a lovely photo of the two of them. So, Cassidy, over to you.
Thank you, Sally. I am so grateful to have the opportunity to talk about Loet Leydesdorff, my friend and my colleague. And like many of us here, I was introduced to Loet first through his writing. Over time, we found each other across the globe, be it in Vienna or Bloomington or Leiden. And the picture here is from a lovely afternoon in Amsterdam, where Loet treated me to a boat ride, high tea, and an encyclopedic knowledge of the city. So we were asked today to be informal and personal. And there was implied in the instruction some sense that we were to discuss the man and not the scientist. And that Loet is a great man is not debatable. His dedication to his wife, his children, his grandchildren is evidence of this. However, when science is your vocation, what is the distinction between the man and the scientist? So I have a piece here that struck me, and I came across Luhmann in the references of Loet's papers and in conversations with him. And I was struck by a particular title that he referenced, Love as Passion. And I sought out this work. How odd, I thought, to reference passion in scientometrics. What place does love have in our field? But this title may be one of the best ways to describe Loet and his contributions. Loet is driven by an insatiable passion for science. He does not produce because he's obligated externally, but from a deep intimacy with the knowledge spaces he explores. Attitudes such as love, Luhmann states, must find expression in actions. And if publishing is an action of love in science, then there are few who have made their love for our field quite so manifest as Loet Leydesdorff's. Now, Loet is also dedicated to building the connective tissues in our discipline. Per Luhmann, Loet strengthens the interpersonal through communication. He engages thoughtfully in listserv conversations, and he practiced open science before it was in vogue. He cultivates dialogue in conference presentations. And in his work and his actions, he demonstrates that science is inherently a social activity. He generously invites colleagues to collaborate and shares his knowledge humbly and widely. And he has on many occasions motivated me in service activities to strengthen our community. But simultaneously, his vision for our field is one that is much wider and intellectually diverse than many people think. And his work doesn't just serve the academic community, but also the broader policy communities. The traces of his wide and voracious reading habits are apparent in his referencing practices. Just as he's able to incorporate seemingly disparate works from Luhmann into scientometrics, he also reaches to publish in a wide variety of spaces. And his work in bridging the quantitative and qualitative aspects is just one of the ways in which he works towards a richer tapestry in quantitative science studies. So I want to close here by just honoring Loet, whose love and passion have changed the course of our field. And the connective tissues that he has fostered will continue to grow. And his current actions continue to challenge all of us to engage more intimately in science. So as a friend and as a colleague, I would like to thank Loet for all of his work in this field. Thank you.
Yeah. Normally, Cassidy, I would give you a hand at least, or even embrace you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, that's one of the stranger things about this kind of, normally there would be flowers and all of these nice kinds of things that the Dutch are so good on these occasions, but we'll have to make do with virtually reaching out. And but I think that's working very nicely. So thank you very much, Cassidy. Next up is also somebody who's a great pleasure to see, who also spent some time in Amsterdam doing her PhD with Loet. It's Diana Lucio Arias. She was in Amsterdam from 2006, 2010, is now departmental chair of the Information Science Department at the Javeriano University in Colombia. And it's lovely to see you, Diana.
Thank you, Sally. I would also like to thank Sasha and Ismail and Ludo for this invitation to participate in the tribute to Loet. It is an honor to be here. As Sally said, I met Loet in 2006. It was a very cold winter in Amsterdam, and it was my first winter as well. But also, as Cassidy said, I met Loet before through his writings. I used to work in a very novel institution when I came to the challenge of scientometrics. And it was a pioneering institution in Latin America for the measurement of science and technology. And back then, we used to measure science and technology following the OECD guidelines. So we used to apply surveys to quantify the monetary and human resources invested in Colombia, either in research, technological development, or other activities supporting the scientific enterprise. We also used to survey firms and businesses in order to capture innovation on information on innovation or other outputs of the scientific enterprise. We were very young, and we were very eager to promote a debate on the importance of science and innovation as part of the political agenda and debate. And in this eagerness, we found dispersion in our measurement efforts. We found difficulties evidencing the processes by which inputs and resources turn to outputs and innovations. We also needed to kind of broaden our scope on what output of scientific enterprise really were and how they impacted society. So we were very eager for new knowledge, first perspective, novel measurement exercises, and for original ways of understanding and measuring the scientific process. And then, I don't know if by chance, the challenge of scientometrics came to us. And this was a time when the internet was not as popular, when access to the then web of knowledge was not easy from Colombia, when LibGen or Sci-Hub or open access were things we were not aware of. So we took copies of the book, we binded them, we had Friday discussions around the different chapters, its different contributions and positions, and we treasured it. And somehow the challenge of scientometrics became an obligatory reference to many of our research proposals back then. And in 2005, my husband announced he was going to the Netherlands to pursue a PhD. I then knew little about the Netherlands, and I never thought about pursuing a PhD as it felt it was something very alien, expensive, and out of reach. So we planned to be apart for the first years. We would try to find something for me to work on. Until then, I would go visit from time to time to the Netherlands. And then a vacancy for a PhD under supervision was announced on the symmetrical list, and I got a very excited hunch. It was too good to be true, and I doubted a bit. I applied with little hope, and the first time I heard Loet was through Skype. No video back then, just audio. And he sounded so kind and so nice and very friendly. And I think he even joked around, because we all know Loet, and one of his most outstanding characteristics is his sense of humor. The other one, perhaps, is his intensity in which he compromises to his work. When I finally met Loet, face to face, he passionately talked about anticipatory systems and triple helix and factor analysis and social networks, citation analysis, cybernetics, Nicholas Luhmann. I smiled and nodded. I could not get half. I might have cried for a while that night because I was scared and unsure I could keep on. But if he doubted me, he never allowed his doubts to show, and he introduced me proudly to many of you here today. I work a lot and I work hard. And he had a problem with my tomorrow, and he even learned to say it in Spanish. He would come to my office asking for advances, and he would giggle at my promise. Mañana, he would say, and he would leave. Doing a PhD under Loet's supervision was one of the most rewarding adventures I have ever engaged in. For 4 years, we worked on a model to measure and model the dynamics of scientific communication, a combination of semantic maps of fields of science with answering selection of references and citations to assess the synergetic development of research funds. In line with what Loet said this morning, these citations and references in a way allowed us to operationalize the memory of the scientific communication systems. And then the arrangement of selected title words, in the other hand, could allow to measure the required variety operating at the research fronts. We worked a lot on the reductions of uncertainty on scientific communication systems, and we argued that it would reflect a synergetic evolution of scientific communication systems for researchers working at the research front. We use indicators inspired by information theory, by information systems, by Nicholas Luhmann's theories on social communication systems. Working with Loet most of the times means befriending Loet. Loet's one of the most open, kind, generous, passionate, and charismatic persons I have ever met. His quest to bridge quantitative and qualitative dimensions of science studies has been pursued with patience and care. I believe his quest to qualitatively understand the processes of science is evident from the beginning with his contributions on science shops and diverse ways science and society interact. But also in his more scientometric contributions, it is always evident his compromise to bridge the contextual and sociological dimensions to the quantitative measurements and visualizations proposed. From his early work with Olga Amsterdamska, Loet has invited the reflection on the meaning of citations and therefore citation analysis on all citation-based indicators. I would like to finish confessing that it's not without a bit of impatience that I wait for your latest book, Loet. I believe it will motivate us to find time to keep working on topics from a holistic perspective. Integrating quantitative contributions to the contextual implications will surely further and reinforce the academic debate and our understanding of the different ways in which science and society mutually shape each other. I believe of all these years' work will keep on echoing and inspiring your young scholars as I once was. So thank you.
Thank you, Diana, and I can promise you, you don't have to wait much longer for the new book. Loet informed me over the weekend. It is now, you can pre-order it from Springer. It will be out in December, called The Evolutionary Dynamics of Discursive Knowledge, but maybe Loet will say something more about that later. I'm now going to introduce the next speaker. Yes, Loet?
May I just thank Diana?
Absolutely.
It's great.
We'll let you speak at the end as well. Don't worry.
Okay,
I'm not going to just cut you off and say.
Okay.
I'll introduce the next speaker. Then I'm going to turn myself off because those of you who might be able to see me I'm getting weird glare at the moment. Diana, the sun is shining in Amsterdam at the moment. It's actually a very nice day. It's not always winter. Our next speaker is Lutz Bormann from the Max Planck Institute in Munich. Hope he's here.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. First of all, I would like to say that the special issue edited by Lutz, Deza, and Ismail on bridging qualitative and quantitative science studies is very interesting, and I enjoyed reading the contributions. Congratulations. My collaboration with Loet is an intellectual challenge and very inspiring. Last year, I received the Deslor Prize medal, and I think such a prize always results from frequent collaboration, and the intensive collaboration with Loet is one of it. Loet's and my common history started nearly 15 years ago in 2004 with a paper on the citation network of the journal Angewandte Chemie, International Edition. At the ETH Zurich, as a postdoctoral researcher, I was involved in a big research project on the peer review process of this very prestigious journal. I thought it would be interesting to publish a paper on the journal's citation network and contacted Loet. I had read many of his papers and I knew that he was a specialist in these network analysis. We undertook the analysis and published the paper in a very good chemistry journal. At that time, I could not imagine what extensive collaboration would emerge from this starting point. Since 2004, we published more than 60 papers in very different areas of scientometrics, such as network analysis, field normalized indicators, altmetrics, and peer review. We had our most productive year in 2019 with 11 publications. We had very inspiring conversations and really good teamwork. It was not uncommon that Loet sent me a draft on Christmas Day, 6 o'clock in the evening, and I started to revise this draft at that time. We had the final paper on New Year then. Loet is very critical in nature and he likes to discuss. He has an opinion on everything. Although we publish a lot of papers, I think I received the most critical feedback on my text by Loet. Sometimes this was a difficult situation for me and I wondered why he is so critical with my text. but I must confess that I profited from that so much since I learned really a lot. I'm very thankful for that. We published a lot of papers and I was really impressed not only by the productivity, but also by Loet's work speed. And I must confess that I tested this speed. When we had published around 50 or 20 papers, I had the impression that Loet always sent back new versions of our papers around 2 or 3 hours later, depending on the length of the manuscript. Furthermore, the fast answer did not seem to depend on the daytime or nighttime. In order to test my assumption, I sent in manuscripts at various uncommon time points, 5 o'clock in the morning, I needed an alarm, and 11 o'clock in the evening. This test validated my assumption. Loet answered very fast and timely, independent of the time of sending the manuscript. I got back to my normal walk time, a bit demoralized but with even more recognition concerning Loet. During the last months, we have published only a few papers together. Loet has been observed by writing his new book. I know the book has been finalized now, so we can start with new common projects. And at the end of my short talk, I would like to express my great appreciation toward this outstanding scientist and colleague and friend. Dear Loet, I'm very proud, happy, and thankful to collaborate with you.
Thank you so
much.
much.
Thank you very much, Loet.
It's fantastic also to collaborate with you.
Okay,
actually, I think we have here today quite a lot of Loet's collaborators, and what Loet said reminded me of something I said on a different occasion, that I think we needed to form a support club of Loet's co-authors to try and figure out, when he might be busy with something else so that we could have a break. Because with most co-authors, in my experience, you send off your bit and you can wait sometimes months or, a long time to get any kind of further. With Loet, as you say, Loet, you'd get it back within hours. And if you didn't get it back within 24 hours, you'd be worried about Loet's health. But I thought, we could help each other and say, look, I've just sent him 100 pages. You should be good for a day or two. But we'll see how that goes. So next up is Caroline Wagner, another PhD student of Loet's, who has one of these wonderfully named American professorships, the Milton and Rosalind Wolfe Endowed Chair in International Affairs at John Glenn College of Public Affairs at Ohio State University. It's also very nice to see you again, Caroline, and the word is now yours.
Thank you, Sally, and thank you so much to the organizers who have put this tribute together. It's a really wonderful opportunity, even though we can't be together physically, but many of us wouldn't be able to come anyway to Amsterdam. So it's great to be able to be together. Like others who have spoken, I also encountered Loet first through his writing. I was working at the Rand Corporation in the early 90s, and we were all very excited about complexity theory that was emerging at the time. And I, in the process of studying complexity theory, I had a chance to read some of Loet's work on that. And I wrote to him an email. And of course, I didn't expect to hear back from such a great European philosopher and sociologist. Why would he write back to me? But in fact, he did. He wrote back to me a random connection, and we started communicating back and forth. And then I helped host one of the Triple Helix meetings in the United States. And then by an amazing turn of events, I was able to go to Amsterdam and study with Loet for just a wonderful 3 years with him. I still remember the very first time I had lunch with Loet at a cafeteria there at the University of Amsterdam. Loet was eating his chocolate croissant, and on a napkin he was drawing arrows for me about recursive and discursive and incursive, and my brain was starting to, my practical American eyes were like crossing about all these arrows going in different directions. But anyway, for today's event, I did want to do something both qualitative and quantitative for the event. So I put together a word cloud for Loet. So let me share it. I hope this is working. It's asking me for all kinds of systems preferences. But I put together a word cloud of all, and I need to explain my methodology, of course, in the process. Sorry, I don't know if this is going to work. Maybe not. But I put together all of the titles of all of Loet's work with other collaborators over the last 60 years, and I put together a word cloud to show all the different words. And I just was very pleased that so many of the names on that word cloud were also represented today as co-authors. But on the qualitative side, it struck me that the words that we would have on a word cloud are not necessarily the kinds of words that would really describe Loet as a person. And so, although it doesn't seem to be working, I put together another word cloud for Loet, and I will send it to all of you later so you can see it. But I included words like generous. I think Loet is one of the most generous people and scholars probably in the world, as we can see from his long list of co-authors. He's incredibly generous with his time, his data, his knowledge. He's open-minded. He is willing to take in all kinds of new ideas. He's kind. He's responsive, as many people noted. I honestly couldn't have finished my doctorate with Loet in the time that I did. We had a little bit of a truncated time to do it, and I couldn't have done it if Loet hadn't been so incredibly responsive to everything that I would give him, and he would be back to me within such a short time with comments. Loet is also, I put on my word cloud, a chocolate lover and a part-time Italian. I think we have to remember that Loet is also an Italian wannabe in a lot of ways. So I also would note that influence on Loet's life. He's just a loving family member, and I hear about his family as well. And he always asks me about my family and sends greetings and regards to them. And so my last word on my word cloud is kind. Loet is incredibly kind. And I think all of the tributes today are related to, this isn't working right. So I'm going to turn that off. I hope it wasn't just a black screen the whole time I was talking. Anyway, so and then my last slide said, congratulations and great thanks to you, Loet, on this day of tribute, and very, very best wishes again. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline.
Thanks, Kevin. I'll have a word later.
Okay. Caroline, there was just a message from Ishmael. If you want to send your slides to him via email, maybe he can show them later, and we can try and sort that out.
Okay.
Because I'm curious to see them. So last and certainly not least, and I've already been sent a list of people who might want to add a few words if we have time, but on our official list of speakers is Paul Wouters, Professor of Scientometrics, a former director of CVTS, and currently the Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of Leiden. Paul, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, all of you and the organizers, and of course, Loet, for the honor to thank you, Loet, by saying a few words on this beautiful occasion. I'm going to speak about Loet in the third person in order to keep my emotions in control. because I think it's really a very special occasion. Contrary to a number of you, my first meeting with Loet Leydesdorff was actually not by reading his work, but by meeting in person about 30 years ago, I think, when I was working as a science journalist and I was exploring the question what the hell the work of Bruno Latour was meaning, in order to be able to write a piece about this in the journal Natuur en Techniek, Nature and Technology, which was a kind of Dutch Scientific American, and a piece in the weekly, the biggest weekly in the Netherlands, Elsevier. So I was exploring a number of interviews with science studies people in order to prepare the interview with Bruno Latour. And this was, I think, the first time that Loet and I met in the context of science dynamics. I was really intrigued by that very bright group. You must imagine I was already 40 years old, so actually past any normal moment in time to start a PhD, but it intrigued me. So I started to attend the seminars, I think very famous series of seminars with huge debates among the science dynamics people. So I decided to apply for an open PhD position. And this was, I think, a project that Loet had created about the measurement of the role of scientific instruments. So it was the second or the third time that we met in the context of this application committee. And I didn't get a job, because I think actually that Loet quite correctly saw that I simply didn't know enough about the methods that were necessary to be successful in that PhD project. And the interesting thing, and this says something about the way Loet communicates with people, some spark had exchanged between us. And the fact that I was rejected didn't, well, it was a bit of a disappointment, of course, but it didn't lead to alienation. It was still an interesting intellectual exchange that was developing. Later, when I was hired in a different project by the Science Dynamics group, I handed in a paper on reflexivity to the famous seminar, which had really high barrier of quality criteria, I think. And I was trying to write a paper on reflexivity because I was so inspired by Malcolm Ashmore's reflexive thesis book. And I vividly still remember that Loet responded before we had that debate with his authentic giggle, saying, "You are either a genius or you have gone completely mad." Well, in my case, the answer was, of course, obvious. So I shelved the paper for later rethinking. We did discuss it at the seminar, but I didn't work on it anymore. And the interesting thing is that Loet sometimes also provokes this question among some of his readers, especially if his writing goes a little bit over their head. Again, the answer is relatively obvious, but different, I think. Loet clearly has quite a number of characteristics that are indicative of what I would call a genius. And I think the earlier seminar today, in which Loet started the debate with actually some quite deep observations and considerations, show this again. Loet problematizes at a level which really challenges us to think and rethink. And I don't think it's just a matter of combining quantitative and qualitative methods, as if these can easily live together, because Loet doesn't tire of pointing to the fundamental contradictions between different assumptions, both in the qualitative and in the quantitative domain. Loet, at least as how I experienced him, he challenges the assumptions that many of us take for granted, or worse, that we are taught at the university to take for granted, because they have become built into dominant paradigms, and also, as Vincent pointed earlier today, in dominant social configurations. So Loet is, in my view, a particular type of bridge builder. It's clear that he is a very generous collaborator. He has worked with an astounding number of people from very astonishing different variety of backgrounds in an amazing number of problem fields. So it's clear that he is in a way a people's man also. But he is not a peacemaker. He is not a bridge builder that tries to compromise or to create a nice, cozy, happy feeling among each other. I experience Loet more as an irritator, as an irritant provocateur, who keeps challenging the assumptions and thereby undermines the divisions that are dividing the fields of social science in general. Now, I don't have the time and I don't have the capacity, I think, to do justice to Loet's rich tapestry of thinking. But let me highlight two key productive and consequential irritations that Loet has put to each side. If we look at the history of scientometrics, we could argue that many factors were pushing into the direction of scientometrics as a descriptive social technology to govern and manage the increasingly complex house of academia and science. And I think it's not too much of an exaggeration to say that Loet almost single-handedly prevented that scientometrics degenerated into a theory-poor governance instrument, both within the Netherlands and at the international level. And I think this was the key issue underlying the debates and the clashes that Loet had with his colleagues at CWTS in the earlier times. Without Loet, our field would really have been a lot poorer. I think it's not just that Loet was telling the quantitative people that they needed theory. I think it was more than that. It was his argument in favor of a particular type of theory work. And I think actually that Loet is in this sense deeper than Luhmann. If you read and reread, because as a normal person I always have to reread what Loet is writing before I understand it, it jumps out at you that he is one of the very few who has proven to be able to combine constructivist sensibilities with systems theory and with a thermodynamical kind of mathematics, and to develop and maintain an intellectually subtle and complex approach to theory. For me, in my personal history, the work that Loet did in 1989 with Olga Amsterdamska, the paper Dimensions of Citation Analysis, convinced me of the interest and the intrigue and the complex topic of scientometrics and citation analysis. And I think that paper itself is already a provocation to both the qualitative side and the quantitative side. The quantitative side, because the citation theory sketch that was written in this paper was much more subtle than most arguments about citation theory were at the time, and actually currently still are. We still have sometimes quite simplistic debates about citation theory. But also for social constructivists and sociologists, the paper was a provocation because it tried to empirically check whether social configurations were more important than intellectual mutations. and then the intellectual dimension. So that is also an interesting provocation. Don't simply assume that the social is always the most important thing, but analyze this empirically. Okay, let me conclude by pointing to the second provocation, to the qualitative side of STS and social science. And Loet has already done this earlier today. Actually, his argument that we should think about inverting the time arrow is the key argument here. His plea against historicism and thinking that history shapes the future is a plea from a systems theoretical point of view to invert the time arrow. And here I think this is currently quite interesting, because I'm currently reading a trilogy written by Margaret Atwood, the Mad Adam trilogy, in which she uses the instrument of speculative fiction to think from the future about the present. And this is actually in line with an argument that Loet is always making in different terms, sometimes with equations. And I think this is really an important challenge that most qualitative science studies people still have to rethink and to meet, and to rethink also the role of theory in this respect. Loet, now a few words to you. You are a unique piece of work. I have learned more from you than I currently realize myself. Sorry. I thank you for your inspiring, funny, and insightful irritations to my system. Without you, the second part of my life would have been very different, and I'm sure far less interesting and challenging. Lucky Loet, for those who know American comics. Lucky Loet, the man who writes faster than his readers can read. Loet, you are lucky that you have this capacity and motivation. All of us are lucky that you are a member of our communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. I'm glad you managed to keep it together, more or less. But these are emotional times. Loet, would you like to say something now? There are a few more people who have volunteered to add their something, but I don't know if you want to wait till the end or say something now.
Shall I wait to the end?
Okay.
Let me wait to the end.
So I have 5 more people, but I'm sorry to have to keep it be the bad kind of witch chair, but if people could try and keep it short so that we do have time to hear what Loet would like to say before the official end time, as I know people might have other obligations.
Sally, just to make it clear, we don't have volunteers yet. People should volunteer in the chat.
Oh, because that list of names you sent me, should I ignore that?
No, this is just names which were in the audience.
Oh, okay. So there might not be 5 people who want to say anything.
There might be many.
I'm trying to multi-device here, and I'm not very good at that. So I will keep an eye on the chat and see if anybody puts up their hand. And there's some very lovely remarks about what Paul has just said. Otherwise, Loet, I suggest that
okay.
Maybe you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm overwhelmed, of course. Let me first say that. This is all so nice of you and so unexpected, and yeah, unbelievable. Yeah, I had some slides. Let me see whether I can get it working. It's not so urgent if it. Oh, here, PowerPoint. It should work. Yeah.
The book.
But let me, before I begin with that, answer to or pay some attention about things which have been said by you and others. Sally, it's a pleasure. It's such a fortunate situation that we live so alongside each other. and that we have been able to profit from that in writing that first chapter for the handbook of science and technology studies, and that this seems to be along as we go, yeah, and I'm sure we will continue to do that, and hopefully other work will come out of that. Let me shortly just react and not go into much detail. Cassidy, it has been, I remember one evening we went for dinner in Atlanta, and it was so unexpected for me that we're so much on the same page, and that we had such a nice evening. And then we had this same experience in other year in Amsterdam, where we spent some time doing a canal boat trip, and unfortunately we never co-authored as far as I remember, but I participated in some of your books with a chapter, and it was such an encouragement that I thought, this is for bibliomatics people. They will not be interested in all this information theory and Niklas Luhmann and whatever. And then you said, no, this is what we need. And it was so helpful to get that type of stimulus that I want to mention this here. Okay, the other people which have said something are all, of course, collaborators, intensive collaborators. Diana, let me tell the story, Diana, that you applied in Amsterdam, and we had a telephone conference with Stuart, Sandra Svier, the managing editor of ASCOR, and I myself, and we had you on the telephone from Colombia, and we were so impressed. We immediately said, this is her. Yeah, we had this position, and there was someone so clear and so elegantly formulating, and working with you, as it is with most of our colleagues, it has been a wonderful 4 years, and I know that I was somewhat angry about not going fast enough. Eventually I stepped over that, and I wrote the programs for you so that it could go faster. Anyhow, it has been an enormous pleasure to be able to work with you. And yeah, I can go on here. It was so an experience. It is regularly. Even this morning, I sent a proposal to Lutz what we could do. We have now this disruption indicator, and this disruption indicator is very akin to the critical transitions, which are both in Koen's and in Diana's thesis, and they more or less the information provide the information theoretical equivalency for those disruption indicators. Well, the disruption indicator is more qualitative, it is more counting, it's not a statistics. Yeah, it's ongoing and ongoing. As Lutz mentioned himself, we had months that we have more than 2 or 3 publications in a month. And it is our working style, where we have this division of labor, where we leave to each other the first authorship and then make the other responsible for the text. And that works as at a speed which also for me is unbelievable. I don't want to go into much detail, but Carolyn, it speaks for a reason. Everybody in the world knows that we are working together. Everybody in the world, STS work, not only STS, in science policy, in everything else, and it's so supportive. Actually, Carolyn, Lutz and I also have a whole portfolio of with 3 authorships. And Paul, I don't know how to respond to what you said. It's so impressive, and I have so enjoyed the couple of things which we have done together. And I didn't know that it was so mutual, this enjoyment. Impressive. Let me come to the institutional side of it. Of course, most of you will know that I have a difficult background in World War II and things like that. Part of making myself free from that has been to be reflexive about history through psychoanalysis. And that model is probably recognizable for most of you in part in my work. That of course history matters, but it shouldn't be guiding. I'm so fortunate to have had this opportunity at the University of Amsterdam to work on, always on content, to stay on content. We had the opportunity first in the science shops, then in starting this department, and which has been a feast. Actually, at a certain moment it was overripe and we had to dissolve it. That has been a painful process. And then we came to the communication studies department, and different from Sally, I enjoyed that department very much because they set me free from all those administrative obligations. So my history with Leiden comes from that moment that we had this competition between Leiden, Amsterdam and Groningen, Twente for the chair in science dynamics. Actually, the chair was more or less meant for Leiden, and I must say, through a number of administrative, let me say, tricks, Amsterdam won the competition. And I remember that when we were sitting there, then Tony Veraan came to me and said, can I see you, come and see you? And at that moment he wanted to start quantitative studies in Leiden, and Arie was in Amsterdam and I was in Amsterdam, and I said, he came to see us and I said, Tony, whether we would allow Leiden to start that. I said, Ton, how can we help? On the other hand, my book, The Challenge of Scientometrics, which Diana just reviewed, was published in Leiden, and it was Tom who helped getting it published. We had frequent collapse meetings where we had sometimes, let's say it's normal between human beings that you have periods that you like each other more than periods where you like each other not so much, or that you get into a fight. But hopefully things go away in 2 weeks. In one case, we had the situation that it didn't go away in 2 weeks, but it has gone away in a couple of years. What I did in my work was, my model has always been that there has to be theory, methods, and data, and that in one paper, all three of them is too much, that at least you need a kind of hierarchy among them. And that brought me in the situation that I have all these papers which are incomplete in a certain sense, and that I had to sit back and write this book, which is now on the screen, to stop with all the empirical projects. It's done. It's with Springer. Wolfgang Glenzel was so nice to immediately welcome it into his series. I'll show you the next slide. It's the table of content. It is about the objects which you know from me, and Paul has made the point about the inversion of the arrow of time. That's precisely what it is about. As you can see here in the blue, I have the conclusions of the parts. It is about the calculus of redundancy. Redundancy is the opposite of information, and information is with the arrow of time, redundancy against the arrow of time. That leads to the option of synergy. I'll not give a lecture on synergy here. The paper is just accepted by JSIST, and we have the measurement now. We have it also in a program which can work, and it leads to a number of more theoretical reflections about cultural and biological evolution, where the issue again is that cultural evolution is a feedback on biological evolution, and therefore inverts the arrow of time. What I'm very happy about is that in chapter 8 I have 8 equations which I can claim there as completing the anticipatory system dynamics. It's a bit a bold thesis, a bold claim, but let's see what the reviewers think about it. It came together, that's another way of saying it. And I have hands off. As I said, this morning I had an exchange with Lutz about a new project. I'm working with Lin Zhang on a couple of projects. I'm working with other people, a couple of projects in Germany, and back to empirical studies. Of course, things go slower when one gets older. You hear my pronunciation is not what it has been. I'll not go into detail about that. I wish that I could invite you all for a drink. I thank you so much for all these wonderful collaborations and also this friendship which transpires from this afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Loet. And I will kindly offer on behalf of everyone, you and I can go for a drink sometime soon. Maybe Koen could come along. So we all live very close to one another in Amsterdam, so we can drink to everybody here and also celebrate this occasion and your new book. And just looking to see if Ishmael or Ludo or if anybody from CVTS would like to say something at the end. Otherwise, I can see people are beginning to drift away, and I'm sure that's not anything personal, but whatever your time zone, you probably have other things to, other kinds of commitments.
Well, yeah, nothing on our side, just really a pleasure to be a place for the community to gather and share our academic appreciation and our friendship to Loet.
And thank you so much to CVTS for organizing this and
Sure.
making this possible. I think it's one of the advantages of Corona. You know, we now have a recording of this. As several people have said, there's no way we'd have got these 100 people together at a place and time. So it's nice that the technology kind of makes this possible. And so, yes, thank you to all of our speakers. I think there's already a lot to think about just from these kind of short recollections and Loet's kind of short introduction to his new book. And I look forward to seeing many of you somewhere, sometime.
Oh, I have to say one more thing, Sally. Don't buy it at this moment. It is expensive. It will be available in Spring a link, and then it is free.
Okay, so contain yourselves, contain your excitement, and wait for a cheaper version. Great. Well, have a good day, evening, whatever time zone you might find yourselves in. And as I say, I look forward to seeing you in life on some other occasion sometime soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you, Sally.
Thank you, Sally.
Bye-bye. Thanks a
Thank
lot,
you.
all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.